Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our fourth and final session in our Back to School Health Expo virtual edition. This fourth session is extremely important to all of us that are 18 and over as it focuses on the census and voting. So I want to thank you all again for being involved and coming to today's session. So I do want to give you just an outline of what we're going to do today, and so that everyone is aware. And so our agenda starts off with our pastor, Tashina Yamini, giving a welcome, and then I'll talk through a few housekeeping items, and then I'll do the introduction of the speaker, Mrs. Sharonda Huffman, a life member of Sigma Gamma Rho Incorporated. And after she finishes, we will do some Q&A. So you will have time to ask questions, and then we'll do our raffle and our closing. So these are the steps that we're going to follow today. We encourage you to have anybody that's in your home that's of voting age to be listening as well. And if you have anyone else that you feel should be involved, please feel free to send them the webinar link. With that being said, I'm going to turn this over to Pastor Yamini. Pastor Yamini?
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual Back to School edition. On behalf of myself and all of Sweet Prospect, we'd like to greet you and wish you well during this season. We know that there's much turmoil in the world, and we are so grateful to God for his providential care in keeping all of us. Whether you're near or far, we're appreciative of the fact that you came here today and will spend your time with us. As with anything, we want to begin and end with God. So we invite you just to take a moment with us today as we invite God into this moment for this Back to School edition, sponsored by the Sweet Prospect Baptist Church. Would you bow your heads with us? Oh, gracious and everlasting God, we just thank you. And again, we invite you into this moment to say, Father, have your way. Have your way and enlighten and inspire us to be citizens here, good citizens here on earth, and definitely good citizens as our homeland is heaven. Again, we ask that you have your way and inspire us to make good decisions, and even in the process of electing new officials, Father, we ask that your Holy Spirit just guide us. And in this, we do pray in your name alone, Lord Jesus, and the people of God said, amen.
Amen. So thank you, Pastor Yamini, for that welcome and for that prayer. And indeed, this is a time to pray for our nation and a time for us to figure out what we need to do to make this nation great. So as we move through, let's talk a little bit about housekeeping. So as you may have heard, this webinar is being recorded. So everything that you hear today and see will actually be recorded and will be available. So you don't have to feel like you need to take notes on every single thing because you will be able to see it later. All attendees are muted and your video is turned off. And this allows the speaker to present without interruption. So there's nothing wrong with your access or your Zoom access. All of that has just been turned off for the purposes of this webinar. So you might be saying, well, if I'm muted, how do I ask questions? Well, there is a Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen, so you can type in your questions at any time. So you'll find that the moderator, that's me, will also encourage you to type in your questions so that we can read them off during the question and answer period and make sure they're answered. As I mentioned, the webinar is recorded and the recordings will be available from Sweet Prospect Baptist Church. You will actually be able to have access to all 4 of our webinars, and that includes our webinar on how to set up your home for homeschooling, a virtual session. It also includes a webinar on study skills and how to best help your students study during this time where they're going to school virtually. It also includes a session that we had last Saturday on COVID-19 and multi-generational homes. And I actually probably it should have been this week because it's pretty timely. So you'll be able to see that as well as this one on the census and voting. Finally, at the end of today's webinar, when you log out, you will be presented with a survey. And if you fill out that survey, that is another way that you could possibly win one of the prizes that we will be giving away today. So those are all of our housekeeping notes. Again, you can have as many people as you need to listening on your session, so that is fine. So let us get into the meat of the session, why you all are here today. We'll talk briefly about Mrs. Sharonda Huffman. She is a life member of Sigma Gamma Rho Incorporated. She is a member of the Alpha Alpha Sigma chapter, which operates in Baltimore City. So she is very aware of what's going on specifically in the city, and she has a lot of connections there. So please feel free to ask her questions about that. And I believe that she actually, I can't read both of the things at the same time, but she will introduce herself a little bit, but I believe that she actually works in Baltimore City with disability and those kinds of services as well. So she is a wealth of information, a wealth of knowledge on all the goings-ons in the city. She is my go-to. She is also my line sister, so I'll claim her there. And whenever I have a question, I go to her. So I want to thank her very much for coming on board today and agreeing to give this presentation. So with that, Sora Huffman, if you are ready, I will stop sharing and allow you to share your presentation. You're on mute, Sora Huffman.
Okay, thank you very much for that warm welcome. And on behalf of the Alpha Alpha Sigma chapter of the Baltimore City Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated, we do bring you greetings. Our president is Silver Kelly Bulware, and I'm really excited to be here, especially among my sorors, Pastor Yemeni and my line sister, Soror Watkins Palmer. And I will start to begin my video. So while I do that, a little bit about myself. I do work for the city of Baltimore in the capacity of, let's say all panel, who can share? All panelists, okay. In the capacity of the American with Disabilities Act coordinator, and I work within the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. So we have been promoting the census, voting. That is like part of my job. So it was really a pleasure to actually give this presentation. So give me one moment and I'm going to share my, file. Okay, give me 1 second. Let's see. It's not letting me share my application. Okay, let me see. Let me go to screen. Then I should be able to share my application. Here we go. All right, can y'all see that?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, perfect.
But you need to, I think there's a box there. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. Okay, well, again, my name is Sharonda Huffman. Here is my contact information. I have a wealth of information, but there's always some more you might have questions about. So my email address is mrshuffman1922@gmail.com. And I want to give credit because I have been working very closely with the local U.S. Census Bureau, so I just added to their presentation. But the U.S. Census Bureau is an agency within the U.S. Department of Commerce. It's apolitical and is nonpartisan. So basically that means, you know, they're not working on behalf of the Republicans or the Democrats. It is merely a nonpartisan agency. It's the largest statistical agency within the federal government. It's the data clearinghouse. It provides data to other federal, state, and local government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and profit business entities to drive their policy decisions. That's why it's so important to complete the census, because this is only done every 10 years. So everything that's done now will have an impact for the next decade. Why do we take the census? Well, it's every decade. It's constitutionally mandated to count the nation's population and households. The outcomes from this census will also align with the congressional representation to constituents through reapportionment. What does that mean? So we're in the midst of an election. So the outcome of this census will determine how many representatives we have in the House of Representatives for Maryland. It will also align with our census, our actual congressional districts. Outcomes from the census will be used to equitably distribute over $675 billion in federal funding for human, social, and public service programs. By law, the U.S. Census must deliver a report of the population count to the President of the United States within 9 months of Census Day. Census Day is April the 1st. That must be done on or before December 31st, and that apportionment can be taken. So the census has been in the news. Originally, the census was supposed to end like September 30th with the extension, but the court has said that the census will continue until October 31st. I just want to give you some community partners. So I have actually got this presentation from Mr. Terry Fisher. He is part of the Baltimore area census. Then also Faith Blackburn, Audra Harrison, and David Wood, and that's their contact information. Now, what's the difference between the 2010 census and the 2020 census? Well, in 2020, new technologies was introduced to make it easier than ever for individuals to respond to the census. For the first time, we're able to respond online with a questionnaire. There's dedicated phone lines, or you can do the traditional paper questionnaire. That paper questionnaire was sent out months ago. We will also use data that the public has already provided to cut down on household visits. They built a more accurate address list and had automated field operations. So the 2020 census questionnaire, it's easy and it's safe. And it should take no longer than 10 minutes per person. It actually took me like 5 minutes. The online questionnaire can be accessed via a secure link at my2020census.gov. It's available in English and 12 non-English languages. Translation guides are also available in 59 languages. So here are all the languages that it comes in. You have Spanish, that's Chinese, Vietnamese. So this, if you went ahead and you looked at your census that you received in the mail, this is like it will ask you how many people were living or staying in your house. This census is as of April the 1st. Not today, but April the 1st. So if my mother lived with me on April the 1st, I should count her. If I had relatives staying with me, if I had non-relatives, because some people might not live with their family. They might be roommates. All those people that live in that household are supposed to be counted at that address. So if I have 5 people to live with me, you should count 5 as of April the 1st. Now, were there any additional people staying here on April the 1st that did not include in question 1? So the first, it says, how many people are living or staying in your house on April the 1st? So some people don't think about the additional people that might have been staying there, like a cousin that had a baby. So this asks those questions. They ask if it's a house, apartment, or mobile home. What's your telephone number? You have to provide the name of each person living there, their sex, age. Also, it asks the race. So it's white, black, American Indian or Alaska Native, Chinese, Filipino, Asian, Vietnamese. So you have to pick the best. When it says white, they want to know specifically what are you German? If you're black, I put African American. I don't know my ancestry. So they ask those specific questions. And is person, so they ask if you're Hispanic, Latinos, or Spanish. There, for people who have speak another language, you can call in, and they have dedicated phone lines for that. And I can share this presentation with Sowar Tai. So how does the data, how is it used? Well, it assists the tribal, federal, state, and local governments in planning and implementing programs, specifically in education, healthcare, transportation, social services, and emergency response. So, for instance, a lot of politics is local, but a lot of funding comes from the federal government. Like in Baltimore City, we have we are developing 21st century schools. A lot of these schools are supplemented by the Department of Education. So how would they even know that we needed schools? They do the census, and they see how many students we have, how many children we have. In this area, is there a need for more schools? Healthcare. So one of the big things, especially in right now, is a lot of people are affected with joblessness, or they might be affected by COVID-19. So healthcare is a big issue. So that's why we had to take this census data, and then it goes back to, okay, well, we have all these people living here, so they might need additional resources to have affordable healthcare. All these things are important. What's really important to me is transportation. I work within Baltimore City, and one of the things when I first got hired was I was a real estate agent, and the reason why they hired me because they thought that they would need to acquire additional right-of-way for a purple line, but then that whole thing changed. So there is not a lot of adequate transportation in Baltimore City to get from one place to the other, so they thought they would put in another system. But that changed when Governor Hogan came, and that money was diverted other places. Those are the types of things that give data to our government to see if we need additional monies to have a good transportation system. Again, there's a distribution over $675 billion in federal funds. It also affects our legislative district. So we had a special election for District 7. District 7 might not be the same District 7 after this census, because as the population changes from one area to the other, so do our legislative districts. Again, we talk about forecasting future transportation needs and determine areas eligible for housing assistance and rehabilitation loans. So here's just a little scenario of how that $675 billion of funds is distributed through SNAP, which is food assistance, and WIC, housing, pre-K, Head Start. One of the big things was that came out in this census was there was an opportunity where they wanted to find out about citizenship. The courts said no. There is no question about citizenship. I strongly encourage anyone who, let's say, is not a U.S. citizen to still do the census. This information is confidential, and there is no information that is shared with other agencies. And this goes more into it. By law, the Census Bureau is required by law to keep information confidential. All responses provided on the 2020 Census Questionnaire or to a Census Bureau employee are confidential and protected under Title 13 of the U.S. Code. They'll never share your personal information with other government agencies, Results from the census are reported in statistical summary format, not specific information like Sharonda Huffman lives at this house on this street and she has 15 people living there. That information is not shared. All Census Bureau employees swear a lifetime oath to protect respondent information, and the penalty for wrongful disclosure is up to 5 years imprisonment. And I will answer questions right after this, after these slides. So everyone counts. So Baltimore City is a area where it has been traditionally undercounted. So when it's undercounted, that means there's less funding for schools and services. The census tract is small, relatively permanent statistical subdivision of a city or county. So there's a little census tract, and it's uniquely numbered in each county. The census tract average about 4,000 inhabitants, and the census tract ranges from 1,200 to 8,000 people. And if you go on the Census Bureau website, they have like a tracker. So this was data as of April the 1st. The national response rate was 42.8%. Let's say Alabama was 42.9%. I think Baltimore City was a little bit below the state average. That changes all the time and they're updated daily. Here is the Baltimore response rate was as of April the 1st. It was 34.7%, while the Maryland was 44.1%. So I know it has improved, but I know we can do better. So these were the phases, and they have changed. The first part was supposed to be education, which started in 2018, 2019. The beginning of the year was awareness. Now, COVID-19 slowed down the process, but these are the phases that were supposed to happen. And of course, we're in the last part of the phases now. So because of COVID-19, there was a delay in going door to door for people who had not responded online. I think they have resumed going door to door to try to get people to do the census. And I would rather someone not come to my door, so I did mine online. But I know there have been local officials who have gone out with their iPads or whatever to take people's information as a safer way than have them fill out a physical form. So this is just dates haven't changed. It's still supposed to be delivered to the president on the 31st. All these dates were delayed. This is very important to me because as Soror Tyleach Watkins Palmer indicated, that I am a person that works with people with disabilities for the city. So a lot of my outreach has dealt with persons with disabilities. So these are historically undercounted groups. Children under 5, because sometimes we forget about those little kids, we don't count them. But if you have a baby that was there at April the 1st in your household, they do need to be counted. Age groups between 18 and 24. Some people have their own apartments, they might be on college, and you have to check whether they're being counted at home or they counted in their own place. So, but traditionally, that age group has not been counted because they don't know where they're supposed to be, their household or living on campus. I think it might be a little easier today because a lot of people had to go back home in April. So they might be counted in their household, but they still need to be counted. Veterans, non-English speakers, immigrants, and seniors. So for instance, my mother is a senior, so I did her census for her. I went online, I put in her address, check on those people who were not going to just do it. And we had a form to do it, but I didn't need the form, I just needed her address. These are some of the social media to connect with the Census Bureau: Facebook, Twitter. They have YouTube videos. I get emails every other day. They're on Instagram, Pinterest, about the census and updates about what's going on. And now I'll take questions. I did see a hand raised, so if I can't really see the chat room, so if anybody likes to read me off the questions, that will be fine if we have any.
Sure. Thank you. I'm going to read off a couple of questions first, and then I see that we did have someone's hand raised. So let me start off by reading the question that's directly related to the census. if I already mailed in my form, why do enumerators, I guess folks that count, still visit?
So it could be that you didn't fill out everything, or it just doesn't, it hasn't registered that you have completed the form. So generally, the enumerators shouldn't come to your house if it was completely filled out. If it was not completely filled out, then they might ask for an additional question, because they can come back and ask additional questions.
Okay. Let's see. I do have a question myself.
Mm-hmm.
If well, first of all, how do I know that the person that's coming to my home to count is actually with the census?
So you should ask them for ID. But if you have access to do it yourself, be like, thank you for the reminder, I'll go online. Because I technically don't trust anybody, and I don't necessarily want people in my house that I haven't invited. So they should have Census Bureau ID. However, I would ask that if they tell you what they're there for and be like, thank you, I'm gonna go online and do it now, versus giving them the information. That's probably the safest bet, because I really don't like they should not be within, there should be a space in between you and them, but I don't necessarily want to give them my information.
Okay. And the census, I've also seen a lot of back and forth about when the census is, when we have run out of time. So it is officially right now October 31st. So people can still log on, or I'm sorry, go to the URL or make a phone call and participate, correct?
Yes, so that just happened because the first time the court said October the 5th, but they said it didn't give enough notification. So as of now, it's October 31st. Now, you know, the courts can always change it, go to the Supreme Court and said it's over, but right now it's October the 31st.
Okay. So at this time, does anybody else have questions about the census, about filling it in, or who can do it, or any questions about I go to school one place, but I live somewhere else?
So what I would say, I wouldn't double count. So I would just double check with that student and say, hey, I'm going to add you on a census, so you don't have to count your household. So you don't have to double count. You can do either one. A lot of students had to go back home on April the 1st, but if they stayed in their own apartment, because they're away at college, then I would ask them, did you do the census? And if they say they didn't, just count them. Because honestly, I want all the money I can from my state. So if my daughter goes to school in Florida, I don't want Florida getting my money. That's really how the apportionment goes. I need all the people, even the people who are in jail right now. If they really live in my household, I'm gonna count them in my household.
Okay.
We need all the money. We do.
Well, I would definitely say for Baltimore City, especially for those that are concerned about how much your students are getting, per pupil allowance for your students going to school in Baltimore City, you need to make sure you fill this out. It's critical.
Yes, and you have to do it as of April the 1st. So if you had a baby since April the 1st, they don't count. It's with the census day is what is going on in your house April the 1st, so we can have a clear vision of what's happening. Even if someone has passed away since, if they were alive on April the 1st, then you count them for April the 1st.
Okay, I see no more questions specifically on census, so we can continue.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next part is voting 2020. Now, I didn't even put a date because voting starts now, so I don't even consider there's an end date, but voting has already started. So we're going to call it voting 2020. This is the second segment. So election day, what they call election day, is November 3rd. That is exactly 1 month away. So what is your voting plan? So I'm going to tell you what my voting plan was. I'm going to start with that. The primary made me do something different. We have only voting centers. So that means I can't go to my local school and vote because it's not a voting center. I traditionally have always done early voting. Like the first weekend, I would go to the early voting, and I went to a voting center. But since everybody has to go to a voting center, and it's not that many, my voting plan was I don't trust the mail. I've had so many problems with the mail. I try to pick up my mail, so it'll be a less opportunity for the mail person to not get to me. So my voting plans, I had my ballot emailed to me. I filled it out on my computer. I printed it. I signed it. I put it in the envelope. I filled it out just like they told me to, and I took it to a ballot box location. I've already voted. So, options to vote. You must request a mail-in ballot by October 20th, 2020. How do you request a mail-in ballot? Well, you should have received a application to do mail-in ballot. So if you didn't receive an application, guess what? You might not be registered to vote in the location you actually live at. So I would suggest, and I'll show you later, you should go online to see where they have you voted, have you designated as your address. Now, it might not make a difference because if you've always lived in Baltimore County and you go up there and say, this is my address, this is my name, they're going to ask you your address or your date of birth. So if you lived in Baltimore County, that wouldn't be a big deal. But let's say you move from Anne Arundel County to Baltimore City, okay, you might have a problem because they'll see you in the system, but you might have to vote provisionally because now you have reached a entity in Baltimore City, and you're not going to get the same opportunities to vote on your local election because Anne Arundel County and Baltimore City, they're going to share the president. I don't even know if and they'll share a senator, but I don't think there's no senator running. A U.S. senator. So those things you want to make sure you're at the right address. Early voting. So early voting is October 26th to November 2nd from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you're not registered, no problem. You can register and vote at a local early voting center on those dates. Just bring a document where you live, like an MBA-issued driver's license or ID. So, election day voting centers, and I just did Baltimore City, but you can actually go to the website if you live in Baltimore County, like myself, or another county. But there's 8 centers. You have Baltimore City Community College, BCCC Gymnasium, Cross Country and Northwestern School 247, Edmondson High School, number 400, Morgan State University, Mount Pleasant Church and Ministries, New Era Academy in the gym, Oriole Park at Camden Yards, Dempsey Restaurant, and the Southeast Anchor Library. So all the voting locations are actually at this link below. So you can go to that if you want to find out where you should go locally. Now I'm going to expand this. So there are also drop-off locations like I did with my ballot. So there are drop-off locations at, some of these aren't all the way open yet. So so the 28th through the 30th, the following should have opened up. And I saw a couple of them. You have the Achievement Academy at Harbor City High School, Baltimore City Board of Elections, 417 East Fayette, BCCC, the Liberty Heights campus, Baltimore Museum of Art, Cross Country, Edmondson High School, Morgan State, and then you also have locations you have a separate location that starts on the 15th through the 17th. So this gives us a big opportunity just to drop off our ballots. But not all of them are open at the same time. Let's see. Uh-oh. 1 second. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So, restoration of rights in Maryland. So, can I have my voting rights restored in Maryland if I have previously been convicted of a felony? Effective March 10th, 2016, if you have been convicted of a felony and have completed serving a court-ordered sentence of imprisonment, you are eligible to register to vote. If you do not qualify to register to vote, if you do not qualify to register to vote if you have been convicted of buying or selling votes. So the key word is convicted. So if someone actually has not been convicted and they're actually behind bars now awaiting trial, they are still eligible to vote. The only thing is, unless you have their driver's license or a state ID, they can request, or you can help them request a mail-in ballot on the internet. Otherwise, you might have to do it with the actual form that was sent to them. But people who are convicted of a felony and they've served their time, even if they're on, they're not currently in prison, let's say they're on parole, they can vote. You can actually register to vote on election day or early voting. So what do you bring? Not everybody has a Maryland state ID. Now, if you voted in Maryland before, you don't need to provide an ID to vote. If you're a first-time voter who registered by mail and didn't provide a copy of your Maryland driver's license, state or federal card, an MBA ID card, student, employee, or military ID, or a current utility bill, bank statement, or government check, a paycheck, or government document that shows your name and address when you registered, when you registered, you need to show one of those documents to vote. That's a long list, but they give you options to show that you live in Maryland, okay? Voters without ID, if you're unable to provide ID, you will be able to vote provisionally for your ballot to count. You must provide ID to your local board of elections before 10 a.m. on the second Wednesday after Election Day. So there's a lot of opportunities to vote if you don't have a state ID. If they say you go to the voting center and they said, okay, you're going to have to vote provisionally because we never saw your ID, still have
I'm sorry, Sora Huffman, we're not able to hear you right now. Sora Huffman, there we go. Now we can hear you. Yes.
You couldn't hear me? Oh my goodness. So do you want to start? Where did you stop hearing me?
The last slide, you were discussing what might happen if you need to get a provisional ballot.
Okay. So if you need to get a provisional ballot, I was just saying the last line, and if say that you need to show ID, you just have to bring it to the Board of Elections the second Wednesday after election, not the very next day, but the Wednesday of the next week to show your ID to say, look, I want my ballot to count. So you just have to show that. So one thing on the elections.maryland.gov is you can even show that if you did a mail-in ballot, you can see that it was sent. You can see that it was that they received your mail-in ballot. And then after the election, you can even ensure that it's counted. And what's the reason why they wouldn't allow you send in your ballot, it doesn't count? It's because it has to be signed. And you need to have the signature look like your signature that you have on your Maryland state ID. So if you do a whole bunch of scribble scrabble and that's not how you signed your Maryland state ID, that could cause you not to have your ballot counted. It does say that you should use black ink. Now, if you use blue ink, it's not the end of the world. But you really should try to use black ink if you can. But they're still they just would have to redo your ballot. In my instance, because I printed my ballot and filled it out myself, the election worker is going to have to recreate my ballot and scan it through that way. So they were encouraging people to get the ballot mailed to them so they can put it straight through the machine. Unfortunately, I live in an area where we had a lot of problems with our mail, and I did not want to take anything by chance. So that is the gist of voting. I just want to encourage everyone to, you can actually get your teenagers to vote. Because let's say their birthday is coming up tomorrow. They can still register to vote at age 16. They just cannot vote until they turn 18. So anytime between now and then, if they're turning 18, I would encourage them to vote. I also encourage teenagers to get a voter registration card, because they can use it as ID, like when they want to go get their license or another state ID or something of that nature. I also want to encourage people to do the mail-in ballot, because I think the events of this weekend shows you God is in control. And I don't know what's going to happen between now and then, November the 3rd, that might prevent me from going to vote that day. So I always vote early, or I try to vote as early as I can, because this election is very important. And I just don't want to stress the importance of voting on the national level. But, you know, we have a lot of local elections, and we have a lot of ballot questions. I think the great thing about getting your ballot in the mail is you have the opportunity to read the ballot questions. If you're living in Baltimore City, there are a lot of changes that they're trying to make to the city government structurally. There's also some state questions about gambling and providing monies for the schools. Like, you have the opportunity to do some research and make a genuine decision based upon the things that you know, instead of just getting there. You might not did all your research, and you got to hurry up and fill out the ballot. And in addition, at the polling location, you will have the opportunity to fill in the ballot the same way that you would at home, and then they scan it in the machine. For me, I'm sloppy. So I normally ask for the machine that is accessible, so I can hit the button and it will print it out for me. They will say, you know, this is for the persons who may have disabilities, but it's for anybody, because I prefer it. In fact, there is, I think it's kind of unfair that if you only had one person, and that probably is not going to happen since we have voting locations, that came to your precinct who had a disability and asked for this, a specific, button, the ones that you can actually press the screen, then you kind of know how they voted. So I just don't think that's necessarily fair. So so I'm trying to invalidate, how that person voted. I also vote on those machines too, because it's more convenient to me than trying to fill it in little bubbles. Because I'm scared I'm gonna make a mistake. If I make a mistake, I just fix it on there before it's printed. So that is the gist of elections. I just want to encourage everyone to get out and vote. If it's the first time that you voted, it's not that hard. It was very, very easy, especially when I just sent it in online. Now, if you get your ballot in the mail, you don't necessarily have to put a stamp on it and send it through the post office. Just send that out early, because I sent it through the post office during the primary, but it's different times now. So I had a preference of putting into the ballot box. So that is my conclusion of my seminar. I have them a little bit early, so I can take any specific questions that you may have that I can answer. If I don't have the answer, then I can get back to you too.
Excellent. I want to thank you, Sora Huffman, and thank you for your enthusiasm. I see a couple questions come up, so I am hopeful that that means that everyone is engaged and has a lot to ask. So with that being said, I will start off with the questions that have been asked in the Q&A already. And while I'm doing that, I will encourage our attendees, if you have other questions, you can still continue to type them in the Q&A area. So I do have one question that I believe was related to the census, and I think that you may have answered it, but it was, again, how does the census taking affect the schools? And I would imagine specifically in Baltimore City.
So the census, looks at how many children. That's why we got to make sure we count our kids, because if you have a kid that's 0 to 5, they're eventually going to have to go to school. So they will allocate funds in the budget for education. So how does it affect our schools? If our schools are undercounted, or they show that all these kids in Baltimore City are now going to Baltimore County is going to get all the money. So it's about the allocation of funds. So they also look at, as you have aging infrastructure, how is the federal government going to support having new schools and new buildings? And Baltimore City has a lot of aging schools and infrastructure that I think is very important to complete that census, so they know how many children that they have to educate. And that is how the Department of Education is going to determine who gets what funding.
So I agree with that wholeheartedly. That funding helps determine what schools get fixed too, or whether or not they build a new school. I know Baltimore City has this 21st century school initiative, and the funding helps determine that, who gets that.
Right.
Even where in the city those schools are built. So be mindful. The next question, so the next couple questions do deal directly with the voting. There's a question from Ms. Ruffin. How can I be sure sending in my vote for president will be completed, or I guess counted? Do you recommend going in person?
I don't recommend going in person unless you're just dropping off in the voting box. If you're doing, I recommend doing mail-in ballot because I feel like that the lines might be long unless you're going to early voting. I would go in off-peak hours. So I think election day, because what I did was I served with Common Cause Maryland, going out to some of the on election day, going out to the sites to make sure they were accessible, and to also if there was anything that was going on that was irregular, I reported it, and I saw there were long lines. So because this election is going to be so different, and I don't even know what's going to happen on November 3rd. It could snow. This is 2020. So I would definitely, if you have the opportunity, if you really want to make sure something counts, I literally, if you haven't already asked for your mail-in ballot and you haven't received it, I literally just took it to a voting box, and I was able to see within 2 weeks that they had received it, and then after the election, I saw that my vote counted.
Okay.
Can I go back to something else I just thought of? This is my housing background.
Sure.
To the last question about how funding, the other thing is they build those new schools when you want to do development, okay? So they have all those 21st century schools in development projects. There is a lot, like let's say Pimlico area. Like the city has put it, okay, this is a zone that we're going to try to develop, so that's where they put schools. But they have to know that people live there and how many people why they need the funding. So it's a holistic approach to development in the city and how they get schools, and who has been a victim of redlining. So that's why it's so important to do that census, because it tells a whole picture of Baltimore. That's it.
No, that's great. That's important. I think a lot of us historically have been very concerned about filling out census information, and then we get very frustrated when we ask, why are we not getting the funding that we need? And so it's just critical for us to understand that though we kind of have this fear about being counted and somebody knowing where we are, quote unquote, it impacts our ability to get good housing. It impacts our children's ability to get good education. So we do need to make those, we need to fill this out. And if we have the time extension to do it, and you have not done it, I cannot encourage you more to, like, when this webinar is over today, get online and go fill out the census. Just in case they try to change the close date again, don't wait until the 31st to do it. Let's see, we have another question from an anonymous attendee. So my 16-year-old can vote without ID, but must show a pay stub to register?
No, you say 16 or 18?
18, sorry.
Okay, so 18-year-olds, they can show So my girlfriend, she has a pay stub and she had her work ID. So do they have a student ID? This is their picture, but all they need is a pay stub because it had her address on it. So the guidelines on, actually when you go online, you can fill out the application and they'll just ask you for that, that pay stub or whatever for when you actually go vote. And they can even register on the day of it. So right now, on October 26th, they can even go to an early voting center and just register to vote and vote on the same day, starting on October the 26th.
Okay, so I think the second part of that question is, can it be done at the MVA or just a voting center? And I think you answered that. They can even do it early voting starting the 26th.
So the MVA is where you're going to get your ID and you have to make an appointment for that. But I'm sure for voting, all you need, you don't necessarily need an ID. They had a whole list of things, including a pay stub. Like a pay stub and a student ID will allow a person to register to vote.
Okay. And so I do have a series of questions here. There's like 5 of them, so I'm going to ask you one at a time.
Okay.
So if you have received your mail-in ballot, should you mail it in or should you just go take it to a ballot box?
I'm going to encourage you, if you're able to take it to the ballot box, I would take it to the ballot box just to be on the safe side, because in the last election, there was some mail. People were complaining that it came late and things like that. And there are some things going on with the Postal Service that I can't explain, and I don't know if it's completely fixed yet. And it's not, and it's different in different areas. So again, I would encourage you to take it to the ballot location and drop it in the box, because that seems to be more secure. And I know when in Baltimore City, they actually had security. You might not knew there was security there, but there was security 24 hours watching those ballot boxes.
Okay. The next question is, what should I do if I don't live in the place where I originally registered to vote?
You go online to that, and then you just change your registration. Now, you will need to have your ID, because it's going to ask you for your MVA issued ID. And if you don't have an MVA issued ID, then you might have to call the local local office for instruction. That's 410-396-1444. But you have to change your voting location, especially if you live outside of the city or county. Now, if you live within the county, you don't feel like doing all that, you can still change it there. But your elections, especially on the city council and things like that, are based upon where you live at. So you don't necessarily want to vote for the 12th district council person when you live in the 1st district. So you can still change that online through October 20th.
Okay. The next question, can I be turned away from my polling place? Why can they do that?
Well, it's not really necessarily a polling place, because everything is a polling center. So so you don't get turned away. So if they say, well, you live in Baltimore County, right, and you're coming to Baltimore City, only thing they can do is give you a provisional ballot. But guess what? None of the stuff for Baltimore City is going to count. Okay, so they might advise you, I show you live in Baltimore County. They can advise you, if you want all your stuff to count, but you don't live in Baltimore County, they might tell you, because people aren't educated, if you want to go to Baltimore County, here's the location. I just have you can go to any polling center in Baltimore County. But if you don't want to vote in Baltimore County, now there is a provision that if you move within 21 days of election day, that you can just show them that, hey, I've moved. You have to sign an affidavit. I've moved in the last 21 days, and they can give you a provisional ballot. That provisional ballot, and you would just, you gave them proof, and so that should count. But they can't let you vote in an actual poll booth or machine. But nobody can turn you away. If somebody turns you away, just say, I'd like to speak to the head person, the head voting person. I don't know what they call them, because you can vote provisionally. They just might advise you you're in the wrong county or something. But there's no voting, there's no actual precincts and things like that, because they actually pull up where you live at and give you a specific ballot for your location.
Okay. If I'm a college student going to school out of state, where should I vote?
Where do you want to vote? It's really up to you. So I think that if you, because a lot of college students are home, So that's going to be up to you, but you can't vote in two places.
Okay. So pick one.
Yeah.
Pick one. Okay.
But I'm going to encourage you to vote at home because there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
Politics is local. Politics is local. Do your census here. I would vote here. And if you're not registered here, go online and you can register. If you're a college student, I know you're going to know how to do that.
Okay. Then what should I do if there are people at the polling place that are trying to make people leave? So I know this is probably in conjunction with some concerns that have been voiced over the media that people will be there, quote unquote, watching you. So, and I would imagine these are not security officers, but just other people.
So there are going to be phone numbers. I'm going to try to get you one comment. So if you show up by 8 o'clock, stay in line, okay? That's why I say I don't even want you to deal with all that. I'd rather you just vote. I'd just rather you just go, do it in advance. So Common Cause Maryland has a phone number that you can call, but there's going to be numbers like the NAACP. It's election protection. Let me see if I have a phone number. So that's kind of the things that I did on election day is that I would call, I would provide the election protection number that you can call and say, look, I'm having a problem. They're trying to make me leave. Do not leave. I'm just going to say do not leave but see, that's why I would not wait until election day to vote because those are the things that could happen. But their phone number is 443-906-0442. So I'll send that to you. Well, we have it on recording, but we had an election protection number. I think the NAACP does the same thing where they have a list of attorneys and they actually will call the Board of Elections and advise them that these things are happening. So then when I saw something that was going on in my precinct, I just happened to see the head of the Board of Elections and made them aware and they fixed the problem, but do not get out of line.
Okay. All right. Are there any other questions from our other panelists?
Yes, good afternoon. And thank you for a really informative presentation. I just have a couple questions here that were submitted. And I'm going to start, I guess, where you ended up at with respect to voting. And the question is, can elderly persons and differently abled populations request transportation or other accommodations at their voting centers?
So unfortunately, the Board of Elections does not provide however, that's why they had the mail-in ballot, so they can still mail that ballot in. That's a very good question because let's say, for instance, I'm unable to fill the ballot out myself. So there's an actual sheet that says.
So, Sharonda, we're unable to hear you again. Sor, Sharonda, you're breaking up again.
Language. There's actually a form that goes along with the mail-in ballot that says this person helped me with the ballot, but there isn't an actual transportation that's provided because they're encouraging people not to even show up. They rather just mail the ballot in.
Okay, and I think we lost the first part of your response. I think you were talking about a form.
Oh, yes. Yes. So if someone has got assistance in filling out their ballot, there is a form that is along with the mail-in ballot that the person who helped them would complete. So I have helped people with their ballot. So I fill out the form and say Sharonda Huffman helped Tyleach Watkins Palmer with her ballot. So it's on record. Because what is illegal is if someone that their shop stored or their company help them fill out their ballot because they don't want voters to be steered by their employers.
Sure. And my next two questions, I guess, deal with the census. And I guess this is from a resident's perspective. How can you identify scams and fraudulent activity related to the census? I'm assuming maybe enumerate coming to your home and that may not actually really be enumerators?
I don't trust anybody, and so I'm gonna, like I said before, if somebody came to my door, they are supposed to show ID, but because I don't know what the ID looks like, I probably, if you had access to get on this internet right here, to get on this Zoom, you probably can just go do it yourself. Say thank you very much for coming. I'm going to go to my 2020 census.gov and fill it out right now. I wouldn't necessarily give out my information to the enumerator, or I will call the phone number. Because I don't trust people, and we have COVID-19, and that you know, you can't always identify the scam because somebody can make up an ID.
Sure. And let's see. I guess there's two questions. Can I resubmit my household response if I make a mistake?
I don't believe so. So you probably would have to call in, because I think that once you do it, it's probably done. But I could get one of the numbers. I can go back to my slide. I probably would call in, and if there was a mistake made. But if there was a mistake made, I don't think it's the end of the world, to be honest with you. Let's say you said 5 and it's not 4, and I don't think it's the end of the world. But most likely, that I don't know if they're, because like I said, this information is not kept so everybody can see it. It might go into a pool, like, okay, we've done this, and it goes into the big pool. I don't know if they individually keep your information just to keep it private. Well, they can release it in like 74 years, but I don't know if there's an opportunity. But I will give Ty Leach the phone number, and they would have to call directly for that.
Okay. And the last question that I have here is, can I refuse to answer a census question?
You can always refuse, but that's when the enumerators come around and ask, because by law you're supposed to do it, but I don't think they're going to enforce it. But you can refuse, but you still stay on the list for them to keep calling you and asking you questions.
Sure. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you.
All right. So we do have another question from an attendee, Ms. Crawford Lewis, who asks, how can I ensure that the ballots will not be tampered with?
Well, when you say not be tampered with, that's why I put in the ballot box. So the only way that it really can be tampered with, I guess, if you put it in the mail, but I don't know how you can ensure anything that leaves your hand. So the most secure way for me is to put it in the ballot box, because then I don't have the opportunity for something to get lost in the mail. And it is sealed, and so you have to sign it inside, and then you close your envelope. But
Okay.
after that, you can't ensure anything. You just know that it was counted.
Okay. And you did say that there is a way for us to know that our ballots have been counted online, right?
Yes, but this is so many. It's going to be so many mail-in ballots. The information is not going to be updated automatically. It might not be updated until after the election, because that's what happened with me. Because it's only so many election workers, and so somebody manually has to go in there and say, okay, this counted, this one was counted, this one was counted. But I don't think it's not as automatic as it should be, and it also depends on the jurisdiction on how good they are in updating that information.
Gotcha.
And I just
All
have
right.
just one additional
ahead.
question. Someone sent me, and I guess the Maryland application for a mail-in ballot. There's a question, I guess, about when did you move to your current address?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the individual is asking, how sensitive is that information if you're not able to recall exactly? I guess, would they deny maybe sending you a mail-in ballot if you can't remember the exact date that you've moved to your current address?
Well, the thing is, they ask that because let's say you just filled it out at the location, at the mailing voting center, you can vote within. So you have to change your address within 21 days. So if you move, let's say last year, just put any date last year. It's really sensitive if it's within the last 21 days.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for coming and sharing with us. We definitely greatly appreciate it. As I'm sure you know, and everybody on the Zoom call knows, that this election is very critical. What would you say to the person who has hesitation whether their vote will matter at all, what would you say to that individual to encourage them to go out and exercise their right to vote?
Can I tell you, this is a very good question, because I did not know who to vote for county executive. I live in Baltimore County. That vote, that election was less than 20 people. So my vote counted, and I have 2 people in my house. So my husband relies on me to tell him who to vote for. So if those are 2 votes that counted. So and look at what happened at the city mayoral election. It's like in the beginning, it was like Sheila Dixon was winning, and then all the young people apparently came out because they wait till the last minute, and then you had a whole nother. It just turned the way around. So your vote really does count. And look at the little city council elections. Like, a lot of things are very, very local. And if you have a strong city council person, then you will see that you'll get more services. They might be more proactive. And so those elections are very, very, they can be very, 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 very close. So we have this notion that, okay, well, if I live in the city, it's most likely the Democrat is going to win or whatever. That's not necessarily true, because look, we now have an independent that's come out and it's running a competitive race. So your vote does count. And let's not even talk about the individuals. Let's look at the things that are on the ballot. So you have a lot of ballot questions. So that can definitely impact, if you're deciding, okay, we want to do more gambling. So they say they're going to increase funding to schools. There's also opportunities to borrow money. They also want to change the structure of city government. I know I've been through a lot. I've worked for the city for 4 years, and I've been through 4 different mayors. So we have to look at all those things that impact our individual lives, because if we have so much corruption, there's less work getting done. So if you don't vote, then you can't complain. You know what I'm saying? Now, there's different reasons why people don't vote. It might be because, of religion or things like that. But if you don't have all those other issues, I'm saying vote, because that's how you have impact on those little things. That's how you can influence how our children are going to go to school and how we're going to get services. So if we don't say anything, it's hard we have crime issues. So whose crime plan do you like the most? Those are impactful. So that's why I say vote, because I'm telling you, if you look up Johnny O, that man only won by 20 votes. So that's a big deal.
Thank you.
I think that's a great point. And I think a lot of times we look at our presidential election, and not to say it's not important, but a lot of the policies get decided at the local and state level. And if we're not participating there, we really have no voice to influence what's been happening at the national level. So we really do need to get out. And a lot of these elections, although you may hear percentages, when you actually go in and look at the actual vote count difference, I believe Sora Huffman is right. A lot of times these things are being decided by maybe 1,000 votes, maybe 1,500 votes. And if, you could have been part of the group that made a difference. I want to say that I believe that I heard something on the news about one of the states that actually ended up putting all their electoral votes for our current president. That was only decided by 20,000 votes. And that was about, and it was about 100,000 people that didn't vote, that could have voted. So, yes, it sounds like a lot, but if everyone is thinking like that person that's saying, oh, my vote doesn't count, then you end up with a lot of votes kind of just left on the floor. I do have a couple of other questions for you. One is, in light of everything that's been going on with COVID, there are those of us, myself included, whose driver's license will still be expired because you don't have a appointment to go get your change before the election. how would you handle that if you are need for whatever reason to go either to a place to vote, or you're going to do early voting? How do you deal with that?
If you're already registered to vote, they're not going to ask you for ID. But the governor has extended the licenses under the as long as we have a state of emergency. So technically, you might not be able to fly a plane, but if you need to register to vote, you're fine.
Oh, okay. Another question that I have is, do provisional votes actually count? So I get the idea that you can have a provisional vote. My question is that something that's like counted last, or does it still get counted?
So the provisional votes are counted last. Why do provisional votes count? So let me tell you why people vote provisionally. Most of the time it's because they're not registered to vote, or they're not in the right place to vote. So as long as you're in the right county, you can vote. But what's happening in the primary, we have closed elections. So that means only the Democrats can vote for Democrats, only Republicans can vote for Republicans. So people who are non-affiliated will go to the primary and say, I want to vote for somebody. So everybody is supposed to get a ballot. So they will, but they still won't count, because for whatever reason, they forgot that they were independent, or they might have to research and see if they actually turned in an application to become a Democrat or Republican. Now we have opportunities to even vote for Green parties. They're now on the ballot for the general election. So everybody who is a registered voter can vote in the general election. So if you vote provisionally, it's only because they don't see you as a registered voter, or you're voting in the wrong jurisdiction, like the wrong county. But will it count? It depends on if you were legitimately supposed to be there, or if you might have just moved. And so they said, okay, well, that was a question. Have you moved within the last 21 days? And you say yes. So they will let you vote provisionally. So those are reasons. So does it count? You'll find out after the election. But if you don't check all those boxes right, and you really never even registered, you can still register on the same day. So a lot of people are going to vote provisionally, and they register on the same day. So they have to give you a provisional ballot, because they have to double check that everything's good.
Okay. So then it sounds like your encouragement would be at least register early if you can, so that you don't have to go through a provisional ballot process on the day of the election.
Yeah, and provisionals do count as long as you have a legitimate reason. So if you just register today, they're not going to let you go on the thing. They're not going to let you vote at the machine. They're just going to say, okay, they got a double. You have to realize these are volunteers, so the Board of Elections has to double check all your paperwork is right, and then bam, your vote will count, and you'll see it pop up after the election. Oh, my vote counted. So I definitely encourage you to vote provisionally if you can. But there's a lot of opportunities to vote before the election, so you don't have to go that route.
Okay. And then I would ask you, if it's possible, if you could send me information or links where people can actually see what's on the ballots, at least for Maryland, and that they can start making those choices about some of those ballot questions, not just those running in different races, but understand those questions in advance. So I think it is important, because a lot of times you get to where you're going to poll, or where you're going to vote, and then there's this question that's like legalese, that's 20 paragraphs long, and you're like, I don't know, yes, no, okay. So I think it's important for folks to actually do a little bit of research and know what they are thinking before they go in to vote. So
I would definitely do that. So when you log in to double check where you vote, there's also opportunity to see your ballot. That website has improved, so you can actually see your what your ballot will look like, so you can do it in advance. And even if you ask for your ballot by email, they'll email you. So I was able just to print my stuff out and take some time to marinate on some of these questions. So that was why I wanted to get it that way.
Okay. And can you provide that URL?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then before I let you go, I think there's a lot of questions in people's minds about, fraudulent elections, stealing elections, quote unquote, things like that. Can you provide, as a person that's been actively involved in voting throughout Maryland, can you provide some insight or encouragement on, whether or not these concerns are valid?
Absolutely. You know what's so great about these mail-in ballots? We have a paper trail. So if, let's say, we had to recount every single ballot, if you went to the polling location, you had to fill out the little bubbles. If you went to the machine, they still printed it out. If you mail it in, there is a tracking system. So it's very hard to infiltrate the Maryland system without having a backup. And we can't actually do that when all the voting is done on a machine with no printout. So I feel very confident in our current voting system.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to give pause just for 1 more minute or 2 more minutes in case anyone else has questions. All right, seeing none, then Sora Huffman, I want to thank you so much for coming on and giving all of us some really much needed information on the census and on voting and making sure that we get out there to vote. And I will thank you in advance for any of the documentation or links that you're going to send me. And I will make sure that they are available to our attendees and make sure that they're available on our church website, because I do feel strongly that we need to get out and vote and make our voices heard. So thank you very much on behalf of Sweet Prospect Baptist Church. I really want to thank you for taking your time and coming out and sharing with us today.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I love to come back if you ever want to have any kind of outreach. Y'all doing a great job. I'm going to have to go to your website and look at some of the other stuff I can learn from you. So thank you, and I had a great time, and y'all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.
Oh, thank you. All right, so thank you again, Sora Huffman, for coming out. And as we move through and the rest of our presentation today, I do want to thank again everybody that came out. And we have chosen 2 winners at random, and I will announce them now. And I believe this name is Cache Harris, but in the chat it's Harros. And Juanita Watkins, we will reach out to you and make sure that we have your mailing address so that we can mail you gift cards as a thank you for coming today. So yay, congratulations, our last winners. And then with that, I just want to say thank you again for everyone coming. Remember, there's a survey at the end, and the survey gives you yet another chance, another opportunity to win. So for everyone that fills out the survey, we will randomly select a person, and they will also win a gift card. So I want to thank you all for that. Again, I want to remind you that you can stop by our church virtually. Our website is there, sweetprospectbaptistchurch.org. We are still virtually meeting for service and Bible study. You can see that on our website, and you are more than welcome to attend any of our events. And we will be busy in the fall. Again, we'll probably be busy a combination of virtually and maybe in person. It just depends on how things are going in our city. And then finally, if you like what you've seen and you perhaps want to donate and sow a seed, the link is there below. You can also go to our website and go to the Give Donate button. So as we're getting ready to wind up, I will ask if Pastor Yamini, if you have any final question, or I'm sorry, any final statement that you want to make on this, our last session, I'll open the mic up for you to do so.
Well, again, thank you to everyone who spent their time with us today, and definitely for those who spent their time with us over the past 3 previous sessions. We appreciate your time. It is my motto in my service to the kingdom that we're definitely all about the kingdom. And this is kingdom work. You may not be quoting chapter and verse in the ministry that you've seen over the past week, but it's ministry nonetheless. And we appreciate your time. And in closing, I just want to encourage everyone to go out and vote. This election is critical. It's critical on many different levels. And I want to encourage you to get information about the candidates, but more importantly, talk to the Father and ask him what you should do. It is your responsibility to get out and vote. Be the change you want to see, and definitely exercise your right to vote. Thank you.
All right. So with that being said, I want to thank again everyone for showing up, and I'm going to reach out to Ms. Harris and ask her to put your email in the chat so that we can converse with you and reach out offline and get your mailing address information.